Good afternoon and welcome in, everyone. I will just give it a minute to allow everyone time to trickle in and get settled, and then I'll go ahead and jump in. All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Brain Aneurysm, Empower Yourself with Awareness, Knowledge, and Action. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kim Stranero, and I'm a Community Outreach Specialist at the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide education, awareness, prevention strategies, advocacy, and support for those who have been affected by brain injury. I would like to announce that we will be hosting a Facebook Live event on September 30th on fall prevention through the lifespan, as well as another webinar on October 23rd on driver rehabilitation after brain injury. You can see those on the screen. More information about those will be coming in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. And then, of course, we have our 5K run, walk, roll coming up as well in 3 different locations. So just a few housekeeping notes before we begin today's webinar. Attendees' microphones have been muted. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please type them in the Q&A box. We will get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the BIANJ website. At the end of the webinar, a link for a post-webinar survey will be placed in the chat. We do value your feedback, and so you're encouraged to complete the survey. You must complete the survey in order to receive a certificate of attendance. Once you complete the survey, you will automatically receive this certificate of attendance via email. So without further ado, to jump into today's program, September of each year is designated as Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month in the state of New Jersey to raise awareness of the signs of and risks associated with brain aneurysms, methods of screening and early detection, ways to prevent brain aneurysms, and treatment options. Each year, the governor issues a proclamation recognizing this designation and calls upon public officials and the citizens of New Jersey to observe the day with relevant activities and programs. The Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey and the Brain Aneurysm Foundation are collaborating in this panel discussion to raise awareness of this potentially life-threatening condition. We have 5 panelists participating today. I am very happy to introduce Dr. Christopher Ogilvie, Dr. Aretha Watson, Keith DeLeo, Christine Buckley, and Tom Grady. So to start, Christopher Ogilvie, MD, is Director of Endovascular and Operative Neurovascular Surgery at the BIDMC Brain Aneurysm Institute and the inaugural Robert G. and Jean A. Odman Professor of Neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School. A leading figure in neurovascular disease for more than 25 years, he has pioneered surgical and endovascular techniques, advanced research on cerebral ischemia and flow diversion devices, and published over 550 manuscripts and 130 book chapters. Dr. Ogilvie is also director of the Brain Aneurysm Foundation, past president of the New England Neurological Society, and serves on multiple national committees and editorial boards, including as associate director of neurosurgery. Aretha Watson, PhD, is a brain injury survivor, advocate, and peer mentor who turned her recovery from 2 unexpected brain aneurysms into a mission to give others hope. After relearning how to walk, talk, and regain movement through a combination of physical, occupational, speech, and mental health therapies, she now volunteers at Riverview Medical Center's rehab unit and serves as a BIANJ peer mentor. With over 20 years in higher education, she is also a certified Love Your Brain yoga teacher and has attended the Brain Aneurysm Foundation Advocacy Day in Washington, D.C. the past 2 years. Dr. Watson credits her ongoing recovery to her faith, medical team, and yoga practice, and she shares her story to inspire and guide patients, families, and caregivers facing life after a health crisis. Keith DeLeo is a retail manager and human resources leader with over 20 years of experience in talent development and organizational transformation. His most meaningful work, however, began after the sudden loss of his wife, Crystal, to a ruptured brain aneurysm in 2021. Determined to turn grief into purpose, Keith now volunteers with the Brain Aneurysm Foundation, supporting education, outreach, and legislative advocacy to increase research funding and improve early detection. He has participated in the foundation's Advocacy Day in Washington, D.C., meeting with lawmakers to push for greater federal recognition. Keith honors Crystal's legacy by sharing his story to raise awareness, empower others, and inspire change. Christine Buckley has been a dedicated advocate for brain aneurysm patients and families for over 23 years. She has served as a volunteer and board president, and since 2006, executive director of the Brain Aneurysm Foundation. Under her leadership, the foundation has become the largest private funder of vital research in the US and Canada, investing nearly $6.5 million in studies in early detection, treatment, and technology. A graduate of the Eisenberg School of Management at UMass Amherst, she created the Stand to Save initiative to reduce misdiagnoses and improve timely imaging for patients. Known as a tireless ambassador and fundraiser, she has launched multiple successful initiatives, including an annual road race that has raised over $1 million. Early in her career, Christine served in various roles in the healthcare finance sector. Tom Grady is a nonprofit advocacy and public affairs professional with expertise in the following areas: government relations, public policy, advocacy, and communications. He currently serves as Director of Advocacy and Public Affairs for the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey and manages the daily operations of the division. In this role, he functions as a bipartisan, collaborative, and pragmatic government relations professional. Tom has directed, managed, and/or supported lobbying efforts that have resulted in federal and state funds for brain injury services, bicycle and skiing safety, concussion management, and the designation of September each year as Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month. He also serves as staff liaison to Voices Advancing the Brain Injury Community, whose mission is to champion and publicize the advocacy, rights, and needs of people who have survived a brain injury. So to start the program today, Dr. Christopher Ogilvie will begin the webinar by telling us a little bit about brain aneurysm. So for the first question, I'd like to ask, how common are brain aneurysms?
Well, thanks very much for the introduction and also for the chance to be here. I gotta try to pull up, if I may share my screen. Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's because what we do is very visual and very structural, and I'd like to share some of that with you. Hang on one second from the beginning. So just to show you all, and a lot of people on this webinar have a lot of knowledge about this, but I'm extremely happy that the Injury Foundation has taken this on as a webinar because there's lots of overlap with different types of brain injury, and certainly a brain hemorrhage is a type of brain injury, and brain hemorrhages can occur from brain aneurysms. As you see on this slide, hopefully you can see my screen, these aneurysms are defined as saccular, which is like a little bubble on the artery. They can
Chris,
be
I
wide.
can't see your screen, Dr. Ogilvie. I'm not seeing your slides. We just see like the cones on here. At least I can't.
Oh, okay.
I think
It
you
looks like
make
the
your
file.
I'm going to
make your
stop sharing.
presentation full screen. We're just kind of seeing everything laid out.
Hang on one second. My presentation is full screen for me, but let me see if I can address this. You see nothing now?
No, not able to see your screen.
All right, I'm going to start again. Sorry.
No worries.
There you can see little cones.
Yep, we see the cones.
Let's see if we can get past the cones. This is like a driving test. How about that?
Yes, so I think you just need to press slideshow and
There we go. Thank you.
Yep.
Yep. Now we off?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. But aneurysms, a bubble on the artery of the brain, very simple. And they come in different sizes. Here in the middle, you see a wide-necked one. They can be more fusiform, which means they involve more of the whole artery wall. And this is a picture looking at the base of the brain, and you see aneurysms in different locations. So a couple of things to answer your question. About 20% of people have more than one aneurysm. How common are brain aneurysms? They're thought to be present in about 2 to 3% of the population. And that varies around the world and around the country. It's influenced by smoking, how much people smoke. Other local factors can influence it. But it's pretty standard that we quote about 1 in 50 or 2% of the population has an aneurysm. Now, not all of those go on to hemorrhage. And when they do bleed, I'll show you when aneurysms do hemorrhage, this happens for just a fraction of a second. And the little bubble I'll show you on this picture can pooch out and leak for just a fraction of a second. And this causes the symptoms from a ruptured brain aneurysm. And blood is sprayed around the brain. People can lose consciousness for a minute or for longer. And that's the problem. When a brain aneurysm hemorrhages, anything can happen between the worst headache of your life or someone can even be in coma after a hemorrhage and yet still potentially recover. As you've heard some of the stories, and you're going to hear people who have been devastated neurologically, but can, with great courage, make the recovery from this type of thing. But a ruptured brain aneurysm typically produces the worst headache of your life. And I'm just going to zip through these to show you that when an aneurysm ruptures, this is probably something that happens for just a fraction of a second. And this is a CAT scan after a brain hemorrhage. And the white on this CAT scan is blood sprayed around the base of the brain. Usually that's dark. And dark in this picture is cerebrospinal fluid, or the fluid that bathes the brain. And you can see some of that as the comma shaped on either side of the brain. But the white is blood, and it sprays all around the brain. And that can produce these symptoms of headache, worst headache of your life, neurologic deficits, that is a weakness or a numbness, or full-blown coma. People can collapse. And unfortunately, about 20% of people who have a brain aneurysm rupture pass away at the time of the hemorrhage. And these are people, you may have heard stories, so-and-so was just talking or in the grocery store, they grabbed their head and collapsed, and they were not alive. So this is the problem. Now, fortunately, increasingly, we can find unruptured brain aneurysms, that is before they hemorrhage. And in those situations, they can cause a variety of symptoms. Sometimes, like in this situation, it's a tiny bubble on the artery, might have just been found because of incidental headaches, which may or may not be related to the aneurysm. But once a headache is identified, a scan is performed. And these days, the scans we have can show an aneurysm down to about 3 millimeters in size. And once it's identified, usually me or some other expert will see them in their office. And then the decision-making process occurs, because not all unruptured aneurysms need to be treated. It's based on a number of factors, including patient age, size of aneurysm, patient's other medical conditions, location of aneurysm, and whether the aneurysm is nice and round, like in this picture, or whether it's irregular in shape. They can be quite irregular in shape. However, with unruptured aneurysms, if they get larger, they can press on structures inside the head, press on nerves that go out to the face, to the eye, so that double vision can be a symptom, facial numbness, weakness, a variety of things. But once it reaches that stage, usually patients seek medical attention and get a scan. Once a scan is done, then we know more about the aneurysm, and there's other studies that we do to go ahead and fix the. There's other studies we do to show the aneurysm better, and then we go on and talk about whether we can repair it. Now, aneurysms can be repaired in a couple of ways. One is to do. Pardon me for scrolling through this, but I wanted to show you. One is to do surgery, where you actually go in, you make an incision, you remove a small plate of bone, and place a tiny clip, as shown in this picture here, across the base of the aneurysm. Once that's accomplished, this is all done under the microscope, then the bomb is diffused, it can't bleed, and you can just puncture it like a weak sac. Also shown in this picture are some other options. The one on the top left used much less these days, but the one in the two lower left and lower right, coiling of an aneurysm, where without opening the head, we can usually go up from the groin or the wrist and take a little tiny catheter and thread it into the aneurysm, and then deploy a coil, as you see here. And that coil fills about 30% of the aneurysm with metal, and the rest fills with clot, and the aneurysm clots itself off. The other technique that can be used is a stent can be placed in the artery, as shown in the left-handed diagram, and then the aneurysm can be coiled, and this can hold the coil in the aneurysm. So these are a variety of ways. This is the clipping technique, which pinches off the base of the aneurysm. And here I'll show you a final technique that can be used. These are the coils, which are tiny and very soft. People think, oh, you're putting this metal in this thin-walled structure, but they're so thin and so fragile. The coils go in the aneurysm without rupturing it in the majority of situations. And then finally, a newer device has evolved, not so much new anymore. It's about 10 years old, called flow diversion. And this is basically a stent, as you see in this diagram. And this goes in the artery, and it directs flow up the artery, and flow into the aneurysm stagnates. And what happens, this is what they look like when you take a photograph of them, or here. And these are inserted through a catheter, again, endovascularly. Endo means inside, vascular vessel. And we're able to deploy these inside the artery in a way, as shown in this picture, where you can actually rebuild the artery from the inside, and then the aneurysm is excluded and clots off over time. You can't use this in all aneurysms, because if you put it at a branch point, so sometimes the branch can get occluded. But it is a device that's now used in about 30% of aneurysms to treat them. And you can see an aneurysm as shown in this picture here. And this is the carotid artery and the turn on the carotid artery. And once the device is in place, what happens is blood stagnates, which is shown in these pictures. And as the blood stagnates, it clots off. And over a few months, the aneurysm will just go away. It'll clot off and shrink down. This is used much more for unruptured aneurysms than ruptured aneurysms, but has become a very useful tool in our armamentarium to get rid of these things. So I'll stop there, because I know other people have very important things to say about aneurysms and recovery and managing life with an aneurysm. But just to tell you, this is what I do day to day. I spend many, many hours talking to patients and families about the implications of an aneurysm. And as I said, not every aneurysm gets treated. There are aneurysms in older individuals, very small aneurysms. Sometimes we think they're lower risk for hemorrhage. Location can sometimes be in the skull base that doesn't bleed. And in those patients, we often recommend following the aneurysm, and we'll get a scan every year or two. But I'll let others speak, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm happy to stay on the Q&A and answer questions as they come in, but very anxious to hear what others have to say. And thank you very much for including this in your curriculum.
Thank you so much for sharing that really important information with us today. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Aretha Watson and Keith DeLeo into the conversation. And I also saw that Senator Holly Stepisi has joined us. So I'm going to try to get her on the screen as well so she can join for this portion. Let me just ensure that she can be unmuted and the video can be turned on. Okay. It looks like we might be able to have her join. In the meantime, I did want to ask a couple of questions. So for Dr. Watson and Keith, can you tell us how brain aneurysms have impacted your life?
Yeah, Keith, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can go ahead. So my story and my connection to brain aneurysms was that in May of 2021, my wife suffered a ruptured brain aneurysm. And prior to understanding that she had a ruptured brain aneurysm, there was no symptoms, no prior history, no previously known risk. She just collapsed at home. Was rushed to the emergency room, and that's when we found out that she had suffered a ruptured aneurysm. Now, her aneurysm, by comparison, was fairly small. She underwent surgery, which saved her life at the time. And, when an aneurysm ruptures, it's not just stopping the bleeding, it's a series of other events that has to take place. There's a lot of other risk that comes along with it. And in her case, she survived the initial aneurysm. She survived kind of all of the domino effect of things that had taken place afterwards. And she passed away suddenly about 2 months later. So, it's been obviously a huge impact on myself, on our family, on our community. And it really just goes to show that even in almost the best case scenario, when dealing with a rupture, when, we got emergency treatment in a timely fashion, she got the procedures she needed to do, all of those things went well. And, the result was still her passing away. So it's something that is it's not really talked about. So it's really important for me to be able to, not only share my story and carry on her story in her absence, but to make sure people are aware of the risks and aware of what needs to happen, right? Because it is something that is extremely common, and most people don't find out until it ruptures, and by that point, it's often too late. Even when things go, 100% according to plan, the risks are still so severe, and the damage is still so severe that even those that do survive are left with lasting effects. And obviously, there's a large percentage of us, people that don't.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experience. It's much appreciated and adds so much to the conversation today. And Dr. Watson, did you want to explain a little bit about how it's impacted your life?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing. Well, for me, I had a ruptured aneurysm happen August 2022. And at the time, I was here in this office, and it ruptured, and we went to the hospital. And after a scan, they found that I not only had the one rupture, but I had another one. So ultimately, I had to go to a trauma hospital. I had to be transported. And with that, after, let's see, the initial rupture, and then through hospital stays, surgery after surgery, I was in the hospital 3 months between the two hospitals. I have a fabricated skull here and an internal shunt that regulates the fluid in my brain. And like Dr. Ogilvy said, I have two titanium clips actually that clip the aneurysms. So it has truly impacted my life. Prior to this happening, I didn't know there was anything happening. I didn't know anything about aneurysms, brain aneurysms at all. And so for myself, I had to learn how to walk, talk, use this left arm again. So by God's grace and the help of my neurosurgeon, who was very skilled. I believe the neurosurgeon community, as when I met Dr. Ogilvy for the first time, he said, I know your doctor. So it's a very small community, but I would say that it really, changes the trajectory of your life in what happened to me. But I think the impact is so much greater on your family and your community around you. So to just have community and find other people that are recovering are great things for anyone going through this.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for being on and sharing your story as well. And Senator, would you be willing to share a little bit about your experience with brain aneurysm as well?
Hi, Kim. This is Gina Pozzello from the Senator's
Actually,
office.
Gina, I'm on.
Oh, okay, perfect.
My camera's not on, so I do apologize, but I'm Senator Holly Schepisi and Dr. Watson, Keith, hearing your experiences with your wife, with yourself. I am 10 years out from a brain aneurysm myself. I am one of the exceptionally lucky human beings. I was having actually microscopic bleeds and hadn't been feeling well for a while, but I had an 11-year-old, a 3-year-old. My husband was recovering from major surgery himself from a skiing accident. And as a lot of professional women do who are also moms, the last person you take care of is yourself. And I went to bed one night. I was exhausted. I had been working a lot of hours. I jumped out of bed shortly after falling asleep, and I asked my husband if he had heard the gunshot. And he looked at me, he said, "Honey, we live in Rivervale, New Jersey. There was no gunshot. What are you talking about?" And it took me 2 days thereafter to drive myself to an ER, walk in, look at the nurse, and say, "I know I'm going to sound like I'm crazy, but either my brain is bleeding or I'm having a stroke and I'm not ready to die." And I did throw in, and I think it's the only time I've ever said this. But it'll be really bad PR for your hospital if I drop dead here today. Suffice it to say, about half an hour later, I got diagnosed with brain aneurysm. I found myself being transported to a larger hospital that had a neurosurgery unit. They attempted to do a coil on me. I was awake. I heard them talking and I heard them say, "We can't do it." That started kind of a process to me ultimately having a full craniotomy. I too have a clipping in my brain, and I've been very public in discussing my own experiences. I have had the great pleasure of working with Tom Grady and getting involved in doing Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month in New Jersey. Speaking about my life, kind of being in the public and going from having a photographic memory to having complete short-term memory loss, PTSD, and really kind of building myself back and oftentimes having to do it quietly and pretending that everything was okay at times that it was not. Um, as I've heard of other people's experiences and stories, I recognize how truly lucky I am in my recovery. And I'm also a corporate attorney. And I've managed to, maintain my corporate law practice. I went from being an assemblywoman during the time of my aneurysm to I'm now a senator. I've managed to watch my children grow into phenomenal young adults and teenagers. But this summer, my daughter, who's 21, was having unusual visual snow, eyesight, kind of felt disassociated, was having a whole host of neurological issues. And in light of my history, I pushed for her to get the appropriate scans. And it took a lot of fighting with health insurance and back and forth and doctors who didn't necessarily think it was needed. And we found out that my 21-year-old daughter has one and probably a second brain aneurysm that she's now being monitored for as well. And while as scary and as awful as the process has been, because as a parent, I would have much preferred I had a second brain aneurysm than my 21-year-old daughter facing this. But with, screening and monitoring and, now knowing what we've got to look for within our family members, it will provide the opportunity and the ability for, my daughter not to have the bleeds that I did. And, we face it together as a family. So, the one thing that I do speak to everybody about is advocating for yourself and your family. If you feel that something isn't right, Don't second guess yourself. Get yourself checked out. Um, as well as if there's a family history, you have a right to have your family screened. And a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of survivors that I've spoken to, they've indicated they've had an aunt die, they've had a grandmother die, they themselves have been diagnosed with an aneurysm and survived and had never been informed that in all likelihood there's a genetic component and that their additional siblings or own children should be screened as well. So a lot of it is being able to share our own stories, give people hope who have survived, as well as to kind of give a template and advocacy for ways to help people in a better fashion. And so I just want to come on real quickly, tell my story and let people know, there is a life after brain aneurysms.
Thank you so much, Senator, for sharing about your experience and your daughter's experience with aneurysm. And thank you for all of the work that you do in working to increase awareness, as well as advocate for this issue. And so thank you for taking the time to join us today. We do appreciate it. And so to move on to the next question that we have today, I wanted to ask, based on your respective experiences, everyone who has shared, what do you wish people knew about brain aneurysms? What should people know about them?
Well, I'd like to just jump in and add to the senator's comments that 20 to 25% of aneurysms run in families, or something I neglected to mention. And the current recommendation is if there's 2 or more blood relatives with an aneurysm, that would be her and her daughter, the rest of the family should be screened. So brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews. The question is, how far do you go in the bloodline? But if there's 2 or more family members, there's good data that screening should be done. We're doing some work now, working with the American Heart Association. Aneurysms are more common in women than men, and especially in unruptured aneurysms. And smokers particularly accentuate that. So we're working to lobby to get it as a recommendation or a guideline that women who smoke should be screened as well. So I would wish people would know that. And as we look further into families, the more we look, the more we find.
I wholeheartedly agree with the doctor's comments. And as a former smoker, it's very likely that I saved my own life quitting when I had prior to my microscopic bleeds because the risks associated with continuing to smoke very likely could have resulted in a full-blown rupture rather than the microscopic bleeds I was having.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your comments and additions.
I
Really?
just want to say I haven't had a chance to speak yet. I know it's coming up, but I mean, one thing I want people to know, in which I find so frustrating, it's a very treatable disease, which is why the early detection is critical. I mean, the treatments keep getting better and better. We know patients that they have a rupture, they get treated, they have a second aneurysm. I mean, this is going back a little bit. They were afraid to treat the second one because of where it was. 5 years later, technology changed, and they were able to treat the second aneurysm through the wrist. So again, raising the awareness of the signs and symptoms and educating people so that they can go to a doctor and present with signs and symptoms and say what's going on to then get a scan. Hopefully with research, it'll end up being a blood test. But it is awful knowing there are so many talented surgeons out there. There are great products that they're ready to use, but we need the education and awareness so these folks can be treated prior to rupture or bleed.
Yes, and one of the missions, the Brain Aneurysm Foundation, when Christine says educating people, we spend a lot of time working with primary care physicians and emergency room docs who they're the ones who encounter patients ruptured and unruptured. And the information on this has changed dramatically since they were in medical school 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So we spend a lot of time on education, and it pays off. We've had good feedback from physicians that they find this to be extremely helpful because it's very much more complicated than it was thought to be a number of years ago.
Dr. Watson or Keith, is there anything that you'd like to add to this question before I move on to the next?
I just want to echo the statement around the awareness piece, and it's really just important to advocate for yourselves. I mean, obviously the data does show if you have two blood relatives, in a lot of cases you don't find out that there was a rupture. People do pass away from some other reasons and circumstances, and the aneurysm isn't noted. But I think it is important to be able to push for that. Like in my case, obviously my wife is the only known relative that has had an aneurysm rupture. But of course, we're going to push to have all of her children tested. Even though there isn't any further bloodline that would indicate that.
Absolutely. And that's a great point to emphasize. So I appreciate you adding that. And so for the next question, I'd like to ask Dr. Watson, you seemingly have made great progress in your recovery. So what exactly have you attributed your progress to? What has helped along the way?
I will definitely say therapies, all my therapies that I've had, my community, my faith, and yoga, actually. So those are the things that I've held on to because, um, recovering from a brain aneurysm, it's an invisible disability. So, because you don't have a cast on, so people don't realize that you're still healing. So you might look better, but there's still a lot going on. So, for me, having community and finding people that I would never have met before has been really great for me. And also, like the senator said, giving hope to others that there is life after an aneurysm. So I think the hardest thing for me is to see my family. I have a 20-year-old daughter, to see my family struggle with who I used to be and who I am now. And, I've had to deal with that, the loss of the old self. But definitely in therapy, in faith, in yoga, bringing me present, knowing that, I stay here in the present rather than going to the past or the future, because that brings suffering. So just getting that word out to other survivors that, they can be hopeful. Your life has not ended. It's really that it might have been cleared, honestly, because for myself prior to this, I thought, oh, I'm living a great life. I was really just living my career, and I was existing in my actual personal life. But now, after this life changing health crisis, as my primary care doctor said to me, Aretha, you almost died. And it's interesting because for myself, I'm like, I don't think about it that way. I think I'm a miracle walking. So for me to talk to people and to give them hope and say, it's not easy. It really isn't every day. But like with great doctors like Dr. Ogilvy and my neurosurgeon and my recovery doctor, all the nurses, everyone in the healthcare industry, they all contributed to my recovery. And I would say my resilience in regards to yoga and doing that, helping me to learn how to calm my mind and, again, how to be present. And I know I went way off, but I appreciate the time to just talk and give people hope.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you joining and sharing your experiences and what has helped for you. I'm sure many of the attendees today will find that information very helpful as they navigate their journeys as well. So it's much appreciated. Is there anything that you would like to add, Senator, to that question regarding
Yeah,
what you would say helped you with your process after aneurysm?
absolutely. And my form of yoga was actually going back to playing the piano. I found that for a long time after my surgery and as I was getting back on my feet, I was kind of flat emotionally. I did suffer from a lot of anxiety and panic attacks that were really tied to a lot of the short-term memory loss that I had. And, my loved ones, because, I did put myself out as being fine, didn't always kind of understand or have the patience to know that I was slightly different than the person I was prior. And I think being open and honest and sharing with people what you're going through is incredibly important as well. I found support groups on the internet. I started talking to people who have been through the same experience to recognize that I wasn't alone. And, my neurosurgeon was phenomenal, but, surgeons are there to repair you and kind of, they fix you up and send you on your way. Never did somebody say to me, you may not be 100%. And so for quite a while in my own recovery, I thought that there was just something wrong with me. And I started to do things to kind of focus and ground myself and try to help my brain heal as well. And I started doing complex Lego sets with my 3-year-old son. I started doing elaborate puzzles, which would allow me not to kind of think about anything else other than the task at hand. I started playing music again and would sit down every morning and play the piano for an hour, started going on long walks and hikes. And it really helped significantly, particularly with that anxiety and the PTSD and the panic attacks that I was having in the year to 2 years after my surgery. And I find that, having that family support network, but you've got to be open and honest about what you're going through because people look at you and think that you're okay, finding like kind support groups and finding something, whether or not it be yoga or music or, Lego sets, that really just kind of allow you to. I started painting and each and every one of those things really helped me become who I was and who I am today.
Thank you so much for sharing, Senator. And again, I'm sure that sharing your journey will help many of the attendees today as they're taking their own journeys as well.
Kim,
Um,
can I just add something
sure,
to what
absolutely.
the senator said? Thank you so much for sharing, Senator. The one thing that I would say is that um, I remember my speech therapist when I was doing speech therapy. She said to me, Aretha, this would be so much easier if you can just accept where you are. And honestly, when you say accept, it sounds so hard and heavy. And it wasn't until I met my brain injury coach that she said to me, Aretha, instead of saying accept, why don't we say we're going to acknowledge it and make some adjustments? And when you say acknowledge and make adjustments, it just sounds so much lighter. And it feels like, okay, yeah, I can do this. So it's important for people to understand that and to know that too, that they can acknowledge that this has happened and you just now need to make adjustments. And my adjustments are reminders on my telephone and a lot of post-its.
Absolutely. And that's really important to keep in mind. I love that reframe. That sounds like it's extremely helpful. And so the next question I have is for Keith. I wanted to ask how many spouses, family members, and friends deal with the grief that comes after a death from brain aneurysm?
I mean, for it seems to be for me, it's more common than other, than you would think. And I've met obviously a lot of people who have had their spouses pass away. Obviously my wife has a fairly large family. She has 10 siblings, 3 children. Our community at large, I think, was also affected, by her passing, and it was, one because of the suddenness of all of it, right? Just the immediate impact, and that, one moment everything was fine, and then, we went through this stretch where she was, making some progress and things were going well in the hospital, and then all of a sudden she, passed away, and it was very sudden, and it's certainly jarring for people to hear that, right? When you hear, hey, things are going really well, and then the next morning, she was gone. And I think in that sense, that impact is really, puts a lot of perspective on things for people. And certainly, I think anybody who is in a, relationship or has a significant other, right? You immediately put yourself in that position. You immediately think, that could have been me, or what if it was, right? My daughter, my youngest, was 10 years old at the time that my wife died. And I always tell the story that she went from being, 10 to being 13 in the span of 6 weeks, just the impact and the change in our lives, and how it's affected just the day to day. Obviously I spend an amount of time, sharing my story and building awareness, and obviously trying to give back whatever I can to help, give people some hope, right? Because it is important that people understand kind of what it is and how it happens, and also how common it is. It's so much more prevalent than people really understand. And as I share my story with people, it's almost always, oh yeah, so and so, or my brother, or my cousin, or my neighbor, like whatever it is. Like, it seems to be that everyone has a story and has a connection, as you bring it up, but people just don't bring it up. It's kind of like this forbidden topic, but it's something that affects so many people that I think the more we build awareness, you can get treatment in advance, and treating an unruptured aneurysm is significantly less detrimental, across all reasons, from a recovery standpoint, from a financial standpoint, like the whole, every single aspect. If you're aware ahead of time, is the outcomes are just significantly better.
And I want to thank Aretha and Keith again, and Senator Hawley, for joining, sharing your personal experiences with us today. We do appreciate your courage, your honesty, and helping to increase awareness of this issue. So huge thank you to all of you. And then at this time, I'd like to ask a few questions to our final 2 panelists, Christine Buckley and Tom Grady, who will suggest some practical action steps we can take to address the brain aneurysm cause, and to support those impacted by brain aneurysm. So first question I have is for Christine. Can you tell us a little bit about the Brain Aneurysm Foundation and how it helps the cause and those impacted by brain aneurysm?
Sure. The Brain Aneurysm Foundation was founded 30 years ago, and it grew from a small local Massachusetts-based organization to now a national and international organization. And the mission originally started out really just to provide support to patients and families, and then again grew to support education, awareness, advocacy, and research funding. And honestly, it's still, I'd like to say we've made more strides than we've had. We've made a lot, but it's still, I think the thing that's really still missing is that lack of awareness and education. And we have been fortunate to do a couple of collaborations with the International Stroke Association, just to get the recognition, be where they are. Again, this disease impacts 1 in 50 people. That's a very conservative number. And when we say that 1 in 50, we're talking about the patient. But about, like Keith and Aretha alluded to, it's the family, it's that community. And, I heard a term that Aretha said, the invisible disability. I haven't heard it addressed that way, but it's so true. And I've tried to describe that oftentimes, and I'm going to use that now. But I always tell people that people who suffer a rupture and then get back into the world, look at who's just on this call. They look like all of us, right? And if it is a survivor that has some disabilities and maybe not as fortunate as Aretha in her recovery, but they can talk to you for 10, 15, 20 minutes. But then if you see them later, if you know them, they will tell you, they just have never felt the same. They can't hold the same job. And it's just, but when people look at them, they think they're fine. So it's a really hard part of recovery with this disease, that they can look like everybody in the room, but they're feeling so differently inside. So I think that invisible recovery is certainly something that's very important. But so the base of the organization is definitely the support, awareness, and education. The advocacy has grown over the years, and we still keep working at that. And I certainly love to chat with the senator more about that going forward. And then the research funding, which is related to our advocacy work. We are the largest private funder of brain aneurysm research. In September 11th, the organization will be in Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona, to present close to $600,000 to 14 different projects across this country on all different topics of early detection, better treatment and recovery. So there's a lot of things that we do. And again, this disease just still impacts too many people. And as I mentioned before, it's a very treatable disease. So we really need to get the awareness and education to be much higher. So it is as common as stroke and heart attack, and recognizing the signs and symptoms like the Be Fast program. But I've said since day one, it's a tough word to say, aneurysm, and a very hard one to spell. So I think it makes it hard to come up with something quick and simple. But, it's the hope of this organization to keep working with the people. Fortunate to have met Aretha and Keith and have them be so generous in sharing their stories, because I know it's very difficult. Partnering with the Brain Injury Alliance, again, it's wonderful to collectively come together and get the word out, because for sure, when we share this and we share it in every way possible, people will listen, and it will make an impact to somebody to maybe they could be at a workforce where someone's having these signs and symptoms, and they may think to call 911 and get those people the help that they need. So I'm just happy to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I have another question for you and Tom as well. So can you tell us how the state of New Jersey has addressed the brain aneurysm issue and what may need to be done to advance this cause in New Jersey?
I can take that one. Good afternoon, everybody, and good to be here. And this has been a great team to work with. And Senator Schapise, I'm very glad you were able to attend, because I think you summed up a tremendous amount of information that kind of encapsulates what we're discussing here today. But in terms of public policy, the one thing I was going to talk about was Senator Shapise's efforts about, I want to say maybe 7 years ago now, where she authored a bill, a resolution that became Brain Aneurysm Awareness Month, which gave rise to all the events we've done since then. So, Senator, thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing your story. And then, as a side note, here in New Jersey, we have what's called the Traumatic Brain Injury Fund, which, think of it in part as a funder of last resorts for people who have had a traumatic brain injury from an external force, car crash, assault, that type of thing. People can get funding if they qualify to help them with getting the supports and services they need. But the one thing that is lacking in New Jersey is an acquired brain injury fund, which would basically do the same thing as the TBI fund, but for people who have had acquired brain injury. And if I may digress a little bit, I had talking points here, but I'm throwing those out the window because I think I have some relevant points that may be of interest here. I'm a survivor of arteriovenous malformation, AVM for short, which is a bundle of blood vessels that I was born with that weakened and they ruptured. And this happened back in 1981 as a young kid. And I know you all must be thinking, 1981, how can that be? He looks like he's 30 years old. But believe me, it was back in 1981. So the funny thing is, I went through the whole process, had brain surgery twice to fix that. And then the doctor said, you're good, no problems at all, et cetera, et cetera. So you fast forward, I don't even know, 2 decades later, where I meet my new wife, or my wife, I should say, my new wife, don't want to say that, who asked me numerous times, have you ever been screened for anything to make sure things went well back in 1981? I'm like, no. And she kept pushing a little bit. So I'm thinking, why is she doing that? So of course, being, whatever, didn't think much of it. And then back in 2016, I think it was, I started getting this pulsating in my ear. So I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. The doctor said, given your history with AVM, you may want to get a brain scan done, because I understood that that could be a symptom of AVM. So I got obviously very nervous. So I went to get a scan done, and they determined two things. One, that I did in fact have a brain, which is very good. And then two, that I do have a very small, tiny brain aneurysm, ironically enough. It's about 1.5 millimeters, I think it is. Very tiny, they described it as. So I've been getting scans every few years or so. It hasn't changed since 2016, which is great. Going back and thinking 20 or whenever it is for my next scan. But the one thing I want to mention, there were a few points you made about yoga and mindfulness. The one thing that the doctor did tell me was to really keep your blood pressure in check. So basically, I've been doing it almost every single day since. I mean, I have statistics 2016 for my blood pressure. Excuse me. And the one thing he said to not do, the first thing he said was stop smoking. And luckily, I stopped smoking back in 2005, I think it was. And then to the point of mindfulness, I think that's a very important thing to work on, because mindfulness can lower blood pressure. And I find it personally hard to do meditation, sitting in the meditative position or sitting still for a period of time, because they start getting very edgy. What I have found, I'm speaking to the senator's point here, is that I found mindfulness meditation in two things. One, playing guitar, or trying to play guitar, and then two, playing golf, also trying to play golf. So those things I find very meditative. But with golf, I do find that could be debatable, because if anybody here has ever played golf before, it can be a very frustrating game to play. So, but all kidding aside, though, I find those things very meditative, and keeping the blood pressure low. I think, and doctor, correct me if I'm wrong or anything, or want to elaborate, it's probably one of the main things a person can do to decrease the chances of an aneurysm rupture. And with that said, one more point I want to underscore was, I know that there is some talk, and maybe, where's Christine's over there? We were talking, as we were preparing for this presentation, we were talking about the importance of having family members screened. Family members of people who have had a brain aneurysm, getting them screened for brain aneurysm as well too. So I know I think Christine, I think that's a push that your shop is trying to advance. I think it's very good to do that. On that same note, I recently had a meeting with a mayor on a totally different issue, and he had mentioned that his wife's sister and mother, I think it was, had died of aneurysm rupture, brain aneurysm rupture, and he's interested in this particular screening proposed policy as well too. He may very well be on this session today, but I think it's something that is very important, because as described here today, and obviously with the senator's story about her daughter, it probably is hereditary. So I just want to throw that out there. I talk and points all together. I'll take any questions anybody has.
Thanks, Tom. And I do have a couple other questions. We only have about 1 to 2 minutes left, but I did want to hear, Aretha, if you had anything to contribute in terms of what if elected officials may need to know in terms of the need supports and services for people who have sustained an aneurysm. And then kind of going off of that, Tom and Christine, I wanted to ask you how people can connect with their elected officials, how they can organize their thoughts around what they want to say. So I'll start with you, Aretha.
Honestly, I would say that it's it's looking at the insurance, because I know my speech therapy, my cognitive therapy ended because I was no longer severe, but I felt like I still needed some more help with a specialist. But because you have to be severe, the insurance won't cover it. So definitely that's something to look at more for elected officials. But as Tom mentioned about the TBI fund, is to have a, acquired brain injury, be a part of that, because there are people, unlike myself, that need to have different changes to their house in regards to maybe a ramp or something like that, and can't afford that. But with having a fund to be able to help in that type of situation would be very, very helpful. And the one other thing, I know Tom or Christine didn't mention it, was really looking to collaborate and bring together all these brain injury organizations that, for a survivor myself, and I meet other survivors, we're all going through some of the same recovery in the same therapies, but every organization is kind of in their silo. But for the survivor, we can all work together to bring the resources easier to a survivor, I would say.
Absolutely. And thank you for those additions. Really important information to keep in mind. Tom and Christine, did you want to add anything else? I see, Christine, you said something in the chat, so I will.
It's yeah, to mention for people to reach out to their elected officials, and this is on the federal level because we do have a legislation, Ellie's law, seeking 20 million additional dollars per year for brain aneurysm specific research funding. So that's a big push that we've been doing for quite some time because that funding is needed. But as Tom mentioned, and having the senator on here, the screening issue is something, we were thinking we're Massachusetts based to start working with our elected officials here in this state, but also said to Tom, maybe we can start working together, talk to folks in New Jersey and Mass. I think that the screening needs to be, we're saying there's that 2 or more rule, but when we've gone to Capitol Hill many times, people are like, why are you going to wait for that second incidence? And I think if we start with the more at-risk populations, the females who are smokers with high blood pressure, start there and start trying to get more data to prove that if we can do scans when the people are more at risk or a family history, not only is it going to save lives, it's going to be tremendous cost savings as well.
Actually, Christine, on that note, I did some research. One of my talking points here with regard to Ellie's law. I imagine it would follow the same path as any policy that would encourage the screening, the aforementioned screening. Ellie's law is pending consideration by the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And my research here is telling me that we have several members of Congress, House, that are on that committee. Here in New Jersey, we have Congressman Kane, Congressman Pallone, and Congressman Menendez. In Massachusetts, I see Lori Trahan and Jake. Tough name to pronounce. So I'm not going to butcher that.
Yeah.
Auchincloss, yes. And then on the Senate side here in New Jersey, in the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, in New Jersey, Senator Kim is on that particular committee, and in Massachusetts, Senator Markey. So it seems to be some ability to at least have, or some potential to have, some of these concerns, I hope, addressed. Just want to throw that kind of out there.
Yeah, and anyone who is in New Jersey, currently the only representative in New Jersey signed on to Ellie's law is Representative Gottheimer. So again, you can go to that link, find your legislature, and send them the information and ask them to please consider signing on.
Which Congress.gov, I would imagine, right, Christine?
Yes.
Congress.gov. That's the source I have too.
Well, thank you all for sharing such valuable information with us today and tips how to get involved at the state level in advocacy. At this point, we are running a little bit over, so out of respect for everyone's time, I will go ahead and conclude the webinar. But thank you again to all panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. I do see a few questions in the chat that were not answered, so if your question was not answered today, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat box, and I will try to have your question answered. One final reminder to please complete the post-webinar survey. The link will be put in the chat, and you'll automatically receive a certificate of attendance via email once you complete that survey. So Chris, would you mind putting that survey in the chat? Perfect. I just saw it was added. Thank you again for attending and for your thoughtful questions and comments. Again, feel free to reach out to me if it was not answered. And we hope to see everyone at the September 30th Facebook Live and the October 23rd webinar. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.